On Instagram, growing up, I've seen a lot of memes making fun of otakus and those who are a little too into anime. I've also been exposed to furries, but I actually have never really stopped to think, what literally is kawaii? How did it happen in Japanese culture that this has become such like a strong force, so much so that it's spread, for better or for worse, to North America and many other countries around the world? So I did some research and I want to share with you what even kawaii is, what is like the origins, and kind of how it interacts with people in Japan, and what do they think about it, and kind of just wanted to share some fun things that I found on my way. So I found this research to be super interesting, and I know that you will too. And through this process of trying to figure out why I find it weird, I found out that it honestly makes complete sense within the context of Japanese culture. Essentially finding out that kawaii is basically North American grunge, or at least kind of comparable in the sense that it's a countercultural movement, which is something I never really thought of. I thought counterculture had to be kind of dirty and like maybe perhaps violent. Or I've come to find out that for it to be a counterculture, the only requirement is that it counters mainstream culture. So it's defiant in some sort of way. Positivity or negativity, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's in reaction to a mainstream culture, mainstream belief, then it is a counterculture. I'm going to start off with some history of kawaii. I'm going to take you through the history of kawaii, and then I'm going to talk about how it interacts with the Japanese culture today and some other cool facts I figured out. If you're interested in that, please stick around. Let's get going. The earliest traces of kawaii begins in around 794, and the reason we can describe it so accurately is because this person, who was a queen or a kind of prince called Sei Shonugans, created this book called the Pillow Book, which described small, delicate, or childlike things as yut shu kushi, which means lovely, and sometimes used kawaii. They used it but they didn't use it the way that we use it today. They used it to describe things that invoked pity, that was like pitiable and vulnerable, but in a bad way. There was also this Japanese novelist, poet, and lady-in-waiting. A lady-in-waiting is someone who just is a personal assistant to the court, especially those who attend to the high-ranking noble woman. She wrote this book called The Tale of Genji, which is known to be actually one of the first novels written in Japanese ever. And in this book, similarly to Sei Shonogun's The Pillow Book, they used the term kawaii to evoke pity. So then came the Edo period, which is like 1600 to 1800. It was very much flourishing in popular culture, this term kawaii. Artists like Murayama Okyo incorporated cute characters like adorable puppy paintings into woodblock prints, enabling its passage through society, and this idea of kawaii equaling cute started to spread. Then in 1912 to 1926 was a big turning point where this artist named Yumeji Takehisa started commercializing this concept of kawaii. He noticed that when he attached cute images onto his products, they would sell a lot better. So taking this idea to its natural endpoint, he opened a shop dedicated to specifically selling kawaii goods, which was the first ever shop in Tokyo to do this. And although this shop sadly didn't explode commercially, in fact it actually closed down after 2 years, he is still credited as the godfather and creator of modern day kawaii. Funny enough, he had gotten a lot of inspiration from the West via the Art Nouveau movement that was happening. With the greater access of more resources, and the Industrial Revolution enabled a lot of people to use a wide variety of materials, and this is kind of a huge beginning of the explosion of subcultures and genres that we see in art today. Specifically, Takehisa created art of women with large, expressive eyes, a lot bigger than that was naturally present, so he's exaggerating these eyes in a way that is very familiar to modern kawaii. So then World War II happened. There's a huge cultural shift in Japan. Longing for simplicity and innocence emerged, which resulted in a surge in this kawaii aesthetic. If you ever read the novel No Longer Human, you see that this is like prime example of lost of meaning. Like, they were searching for meaning having lost this national identity that they've had forever. And this resulted in the surge in popularity of manga and anime. Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy debuted in 1952, and I see this as the first modern example of kawaii, who's also innovating in kawaii with his Rune Girls. This kind of reminds me of like the Powerpuff Girls in some way, just because of the no nose and giant eyes. I also don't like the malformed giant balloon heads. Not really my thing. And I'm kind of glad that didn't stick around. Like, I don't think we see that in modern kawaii. Comparing the two, I'm glad Astro Boy became the primary dominant aesthetic style. During this period, people started having more disposable income, and kawaii eventually became associated with wealth. So kawaii became this status symbol within their society. This all culminated into the 1970s, where the huge growth in kawaii started. It was largely driven by teenage girls, funny enough, where mechanical pencils were invented, so it enabled students to write in a different type of way. And this writing style wasn't accepted by the teachers, who were used to a lot more traditional style of writing. In this new style, people were writing little stars and smiley faces and being way more expressive with their writing. And they also began to skip school and instead just read manga and watch anime, so much so that it was eventually banned. And this is the reason why kawaii is connected to counterculture. In 1970, Sanrio created Hello Kitty. And if you didn't know, Hello Kitty is the #2 selling IP of all time. To say this was culturally significant is to understate it. And the reason why Hello Kitty was so popular is because it is a blank slate for which people can project their own emotions on. And Hello Kitty started by Yuko Yamaguchi, who was hired to create a character to put on a coin purse. And the character Hello Kitty immediately caught on. And people who really liked kawaii started acting very kawaii in person. This person named Seiko Matsuda popularized this way of deliberately acting like a child, like childlike demeanor, called buriko. Which is what we see today in modern J-pop artists and K-pop artists. If you didn't know, I just found out the difference thanks to my wonderful girlfriend. J is for Japanese, K for Korean. We're learning so many things today, it's amazing. That style of writing that the students were using and which was eventually banned went on to inspire emojis. And around the 90s and early 2000s, with the invention of the internet and the connectivity of the world, came the intense diversification of the aesthetic. Here are some of my favorites. So there's Guru Kawaii, which is like grotesque cute, fusing cuteness with unsettling imagery. And this all reminds me of that Xbox 360 game called Naughty Bear. I had to look this up. And it's under the Guru Kawaii aesthetic with its art style. The objective of the game is to murder as many bears as possible, these cute bears, and you play as this drunk alcoholic bear. If you remember playing this game, let me know, because this feels like a fever dream. I like Goro Kawaii because it has reconnected to the roots of kawaii being this countercultural thing that is very taboo. And kawaii now has become so mainstream that it has lost that connection to the taboo. And there's other styles of kawaii, like mental health is menhera, which is sick cute, and it's very heavily associated with mental illness and physical illness. It shows how people maybe with like disabilities or who are differently abled use kawaii and kind of connect to that on a personal level. It shows the flexibility of this concept. But no matter the subgenre, the general look of kawaii is similar, with rounded character design, very large expressive eyes, small or absent noses and mouths, which can be enhanced by a baby-like appearance and allow for emotional projection, especially is really important. Common color palettes are usually pastel shades, though bright colors are used, especially in the emoticon that they put on top of the drawings. These are like hearts and stars and sweet foods when a character is thinking about like a pie or something. Animal features, like you got obviously the cat girls that Japan is so famous for, and baby-like features that make people want to nurture it. And there is that idea that it's a common instinct within us, like to be able to take care of a cute thing means that our babies can survive to the next generation, thus passing our genes on. So there's like evolutionary explanation for why people like kawaii. Okay, we've covered the what, who, what, where, when. But now, let's cover the why. Kawaii is very connected with Japan in its culture of this idea like wabi-sabi, which is beauty in imperfection, and mono no aware, which is this appreciation for things that won't last, which strikes similar nerves to taking care of something and making sure that you enjoy it and like make it last. But some argue that kawaii is more tuned towards cute and neat and like this really short-term knee-jerk reaction, this instinct. It's like taking advantage of that natural instinct rather than appreciating like complex beauty and complex art that takes a very long time to create. In my opinion, this aligns very much with the trend of like social media and the acceleration of media consumption since like the internet age. It's just kind of increased everything. Like the news cycle is like 5 minutes now, I feel like. Another reason Japan really latched onto kawaii as a counterculture, it's because Japan has this soft power that they were gearing towards after World War II because the hard power method obviously didn't work for them. It's much more diplomatic to influence other cultures through a consensual process than a war effort. However, some people think that this infantilizes Japan's image or dilutes its cultural meanings through culturally odorless designs for profit. I totally agree about the culturally odorless design, but also it doesn't really matter. Like, you're getting your idea across. These are individual people, usually young women, who are designing these characters, and it's becoming globally recognized and popularized through other cultures. And even though maybe some kid in North America doesn't recognize Pokemon as obviously Japan, when they get older, they'll piece that together, man. I don't think this is a negative process at all, but I could be missing the point, so I don't know. By the way, I'm not Japanese, so take my cultural analysis with a grain of salt. Although I did do a fat amount of research, I haven't lived in Japan for the years that it takes to actually get a sense of the cultural ecosystem. And I think that culturally odorless design for profit is intentional. If it was unintentional, then I would think that would be a problem, but they're obviously doing it on purpose, influencing other culture and spreading their ideas in a peaceful way, which is, I don't see any problem with that. But let me know if you disagree. And this is the elephant in the room, kawaii and gender. At first, I didn't understand why would young women want to be treated more childish and potentially infantilize themselves. And through researching kawaii, I think this is because Japanese culture is super strict, especially in like the 1980s when kawaii kind of started exploding. Super, super strict culture of working like 12-hour shifts. Some people even sleep in their company building. It's not uncommon to have beds underneath their desks. It's kind of crazy, but this kind of kawaii idea offers an escapism into innocence, freeing themselves of societal expectations of being an adult. So it's not really necessarily a gender thing, more than a adult thing. And obviously, kawaii is just like any other creative outlet. So people, especially artists, will latch onto it and cause momentum for that movement and allow it to spread within their culture. And then the business people, and there's overlap with artists who are businessmen, obviously, spread that idea beyond the country of origin. But I think you can definitely criticize kawaii for that infantilization. But again, I think it is on purpose. I think it is an escape into innocence, escape into having less responsibility, or not even less responsibility, but being okay to be angry at it and sad at it and to have these emotions about it, which I think is empowering. The parts I don't like are when it's geared towards making men happy, if you know what I'm talking about, which I think is pretty bad because it is mixing two realms that shouldn't be mixed. And I have to be safe because I'm on YouTube, but you should know what I'm saying. I'd also want to point out the fact that the Japanese mainstream government uses kawaii ideas to push their rules, and like they have, just for example, the police have kawaii mascots that are basically their marketing arm, which I think is kind of strange and is misappropriating the idea because the government is the man, okay? The man cannot be cool. That's lame. Speaking about men, some men engage with kawaii aesthetics. There's this term called genderless kai, which is a fashion trend, seeing young men embrace traditionally feminine styles and men who adopt such styles can face prejudice because Japan isn't very PC. They're actually super conservative. And then some people obviously think that its connection to consumerism is a bad thing. I agree that like the message can be lost when people are oversharing it. But I think that's also just a natural consequence of being so interconnected. Anyone can take an idea, morph it, create something new. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But yeah, I guess if you're just making kawaii things for profit, you're selling out. There's gotta be a part that is still rooted in the culture, or else you are just misappropriating it and selling it out. But I think society kind of forces us to sell off a lot of things, so I don't blame people. Also, there's this argument that like escapism equals bad. I mean, it's everything in moderation, guys. If you're gonna just escape into kawaii-ness for your entire life, yes, it's bad. Obviously, don't do that. But if you use it in moderation, just like anything, all good. There are people in Japan called otakus, and people in the West called otakus. These people are generally different, okay? The neckbeards that we see in the West are much different and way cringier than otakus in Japan. Otakus in Japan are described as men who lack masculinity. Okay, that applies to otakus in the West, but otakus in the West misappropriating a culture that they don't even understand fully. So it results in these weird kawaii mix with anime obsession and fetishization of Japanese culture. Like, Japan isn't a weak society, but these guys think that they can just pull up to Japan and get all the women because all the men there are so lame. But no. Japanese people look down on otakus as much as North Americans look down on otakus in the West. We gotta thank the global exporting of kawaii to create otakus in the West, because the cute economy, as they call it, generates over $21 billion a year. That's counting everything, including like movies, television shows, K-pop. I mean, this is a giant movement. Kawaii is just a marketing tool at this point. It markets food, financial services, and as I mentioned earlier, the government. Similarly to the hippie movement in the West and the grunge movement, it has been commercialized, it has sold out. Whether that's a bad thing or not is up to you, but everything cool gets commercialized. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's honestly inevitable. I just want to keep the commercialization in the hands of the people who created the movement to begin with. I would have liked to seen a world where it wasn't a person who hired an artist to create Hello Kitty. It was just the artist that creates Hello Kitty and then markets it and then owns their character and sells it and becomes this, global phenomenon. And then the money goes to the person who actually made it. Not that she was underpaid or anything. I'm sure she's doing fine, but I wish that more artists had that marketing arm within them, because I genuinely think that if you have a great idea, it's your job to share it and it's your job to popularize it because it's something that's noble. And if you're not profiting off your creations, then in this world, you probably won't be able to create for much longer because you'll need to get a job, a 9-to-5, and survive. And that wears us down. There are many artists that are doing this today, such as Takashi Murakami, owning his art and evolving it so that it maintains relevance and also pushes the boundaries of what his art means and what art means in general. One bonus fact is that Kawaii has influenced their food, and that's like if you had grunge restaurants in the West, so there's Kawaii themed restaurants in Japan, but if there was a grunge themed restaurant in the West, I imagine that would be the nastiest food you have ever eaten in the world. This drawing was pretty, not my favorite drawing. I was very much pushing my bounds artistically. I do not draw cartoon style very often, or ever, to be honest. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. Kawaii is awesome. If you made it this far, like, subscribe,